Yes, I know I am late on this topic, but I want to talk about the article about banning homeschool that was in, I think, one of the Harvard student, publications by Elizabeth Bartholet. And also, recently today, another Harvard expert has come out and decided to give his 2 cents on why he believes homeschooling should not have even been an option during this coronavirus time and why we need to get kids back into school. But first, hello, greetings, everyone. First, I want to give us a lens here, and I want to talk about this through the lens of the Black American because the articles that I've seen against or for what these people are saying. Don't come here because you're naked. That's a PY. They've really been quite just thinking about themselves, just thinking about a general populace. But I'm more concerned with the Black population here, and I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I just want to inform you of why these people are wrong, especially when it comes to Black Americans. So just a quick review or refresher, or in case you haven't heard, this woman who is a Harvard law professor, Elizabeth Bartholet, called for a presumptive ban on homeschooling in America, requiring parents to prove they're capable of providing an adequate education in a safe environment. So she generally talks about, she has 2 points, basic points. One, she says that homeschooling is primarily used by conservative Christians who want to keep their children in line or in check or in control. And she feels like that's generally a bad thing, that parents don't have authority over their children or should not have total authority over their children in society. She also states that, again, that parents are inadequate. If you don't have the proper education, you can't teach your child. And she talks about how it leads to physical, verbal abuse. So that's generally it. And she wrote this. This was a small article that she wrote, which was about a larger 80-page paper that she had published some time ago. So I did go and I did read the full paper, and it was generally full of generalizations and not much data. And the data that was there was used in I don't know how it would pass any sort of peer review, just looking at it from an academic point of view, which makes me really doubt. I mean, if you ever had any doubts about whether people who went to Ivy League schools were smarter than you, or like, I don't know what all this elitism is about, but that was a very poor paper. If I wrote that, I don't think my professors at Howard would even allow me to be able to publish such terrible research. For example, one thing she says is that the amount or the percentage of homeschoolers who are conservative Christians are anywhere between over 50 and 90%. Like that's a big range. It's not like, oh, conservative Christians might be 50 or 55%. She's like, it could be 50%, could be 90%. We don't know. So I don't even know what that research is. So number one, if you want to go and read it, it's not going to be a very good research. Number two, I looked into her background, just in general, who she was as a person, because you do have to kind of take a look at the author's purpose. I saw that she does a lot of things surrounding children and protecting children. And so, I think to myself, generally, if you've built a life around children's rights, you can't be that bad of a person, right? But, looking at what she authored, in her personal decision, she has at least one adopted child from maybe I think South America, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere. And she then wrote some research or opinions, on international adoptions. She feels that uh, countries internationally should not have a right to ban international adoptions. She actually wrote that in many of these cases, and I don't even know where you get many from, just come up with a word like that, no numbers behind it. But she wrote, in many cases, an adoptive parent from America or the UK or Canada or abroad is the only option for these children. I'm just thinking, wow, millions of people in their own countries, but an American is the only option for these children. And so therefore, restrictions should be loosened on international adoptions. So there you kind of get where she's coming from on this. It's not like a place like, oh, we just want to protect all children. It comes from something that appears to be a bit deeper and personal for her, and maybe in her quest for children. So that's that. But, some people do believe that. They have this white superiority, even though she claims to be anti-racist, but they just believe that they're the best and they're the best option. And she apparently also believes that her education makes her more qualified than some parent with a high school education to teach their child. But so that's the background. And now I just kind of want to counter two of her points, and then I'm going to go to sleep here and maybe hear what you guys have to say. Two of her points. Number one, abuse. And there have been it's not really research, but some data that suggests that calls to child abuse hotlines have been down, varying upon the states, 45% in some states, 50% in other states. And that makes sense because teachers are the number one reporters of abuse. And so there is a legitimate concern that if children are not in school, they are less visible and greater targets for abuse within the household. But whenever there's an argument like that, I think we really need to look at the reality of the situation. Because the reality is that as a teacher, I have reported abuse of children probably over 10 times. How many cases of abuse got even a glance? 0. So does not having teachers report really matter? Like, is that changing anything? Because the families who are abusing or neglecting their children, not just the teachers know. The community members, they know that. They see those kids aren't fed. They see those kids out on the street at all times of the night. So they know, people know that the abuse is going on. And even when we report those 10 times that I have reported, a lot of times, the Department of Social Services, they know too. They just can't or won't do anything about it, or they're just so overwhelmed. So I don't know if it really matters that reports by teachers are down. I think the number we should be looking at is the actual abuse. Has actual abuse increased? And is that just in general across all populations, or is it just in the populations that are already, those children who are already vulnerable, which in many cases we already know who those children are? And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't continue to check up on those kids, other than the fact that they weren't going to check up on them anyway. Now, let me give you a specific example. I said this example before, then I'll give you another example. So I had let's just say it was a group of fourth graders whose the girl came to school with black and blue eyes, right? For like a week. I called, this was in DC. called DC, what was it? DC Social Services, DCFS. I don't know what it's called in DC. I called them. They said, okay, she's already on our radar. There's nothing else we can do. That's it. The child is like, oh, Miss Mays, am I going to have to go home today? I was like, yeah, I did what I was supposed to do. I reported it. There's literally nothing else I can do about that. And we're in school. Moving on another year, there's a group of students from the same family who come to school extremely dirty every single day, smelling like urine every single day. Just same clothes, not washed every single day. Report it to our social worker, report it to the principal, report it to other teachers. They know that. Yep, mom's a crackhead, dad's a pimp, so what are we going to do about it? They probably already have social services involved with the family. So there's that. So I don't really believe that keeping children at home is a problem in that sense. The children who are going to be abused, I don't want to say generally, but we know who they are. So that's that. And I will also say this, the mental abuse of our children in these schools. I don't know about the children of people like Elizabeth and the other dude who go to Harvard, but when our children go to school, they are mentally abused. And if you think that your children are not, then you need to have a little bug or a little recorder or something and send that in with your child, because regardless of income level, even regardless of race, and a lot of times teachers, staff members, they say some crazy things to children. Now, good for you if your child goes to a school where that doesn't happen. But in many cases it does. Good schools, bad schools. Like I said, in every single school that I have taught, I have witnessed adults put their hands on children and get physical with them. I've witnessed adults, and I've only taught at elementary schools now. Okay, so if you're getting physical with someone who is under 10 years old, that's a problem, right? If you're cursing at every single school, they're cursing at these kids, picking them up, tearing them around, threatening them, and not in like a teacher threaten type of way, like do your work, and like I'm going to harm you because you've disrespected me kind of way. So they're not really talking about the mental abuse that our kids are suffering at the hands of our own people in these schools. Certainly, they haven't gotten anywhere close to the white supremacy that is taught in our schools, inadvertently and outright. And we still see like egregious cases of it today. We see like crazy things happening, like principals coming to school in blackface and them making the black students pretend to be slaves. We see like cases like that, but also just in the books that are read, in the curriculum, in the way that our people are largely left out of history, that our kids are taught that slavery is our history. That's white supremacy. And so the author is concerned that conservative Christians are going to keep their kids home and only teach them one worldview. But they do the same thing to our kids when they go to school. They're only taught that view. No, very few schools, maybe a handful across the country, some of them private, teach our children to have pride in themselves. All of them teach from a European view of history, period. So that's basically all I have to say about that. And I think that if you want to teach your kids whatever you want to teach them, then you can keep them home and teach them that. If you don't want to send your children to school because what they're teaching is against your religion, you should have every right to keep your child home. The government does not have a right to tell you what to teach your child. The government really does not have that right, especially this government. They have your children standing up, pledging allegiance to their flag while they're shooting your kids down in the street. And they have the right to tell us that we're not qualified to teach our children. Let's not forget that the great majority of our kids leave high school reading on an elementary level. But she wants to say that parents aren't qualified She wants parents to have to pass some sort of test or show some sort of qualifications. But in most of our schools, our kids are taught by first and second year teachers who know nothing about teaching, who go to a few weeks of training and then they're thrust into the classroom. They don't know anything about anything. They might have a D average in school and they're put as teachers to teach in our schools. So it just doesn't make sense to me. Go to sleep. Let's see. She's cleaning. Okay. The doctor screened for this at the appointments. That's true. I think there are other places where we can look for child abuse. But I really just think like we don't really need to think inside their box of how to curb child abuse. Because we also know that many of the children who are in schools, most of the children who are abused are in school, right? Because only 3% of the population homeschools, right? So we know that the children who are being abused are in schools also. So I think that we can have some other checks and balances that we need to work out in our own community. Church, doctor's offices, whatever else, community centers, whatever you want to do. Again, like you guys, even growing up, people knew. I remember thinking like, okay, these people are happening to this child, but everyone's just letting it happen. Okay. Right? So people know. Let's see. I'm looking to see y'all's thoughts now. The way things are now, I'm considering homeschooling my grandkids. How do I ensure they get education needed to progress without focusing on ESOL? Yeah, well, I would say remember this. Number one, generally, whatever you teach your child at home, you're giving them one-on-one attention that they would not get in school. That's one thing. The second thing is that most likely, they're going to end up with a larger degree of knowledge than the average student who graduates from public school in America. We've seen it, that Americans know absolutely nothing about science when we graduate from high school. So what was it like? Very low number, 8% or something like that who passed, right? So if you just teach your child or your grandchild at a basic level, they'll be fine. It's really not hard, believe me. If you just even get workbooks and you just go through the workbooks casually over the years or whatever, the child is going to gain more knowledge than sitting in a classroom all day with other kids goofing off and them trying to get something from the teacher. So I really want to reassure you, I don't know how as a teacher I can make it more clear that I've taught in a few different schools. And I do tend to choose the worst schools because I like a challenge. I like to go in and really help the kids who are in need. But I've heard from my colleagues at other schools, and I've done school visits when I was managing teachers. Like, how many schools was that in Baltimore? Like over 10, maybe 13 different schools that I would go around to, and they're all the same. There's not much learning happening. Now, if you happen to get into some great, like Jeffrey Canada's charter school or some awesome private school or an awesome public school, then that's great. But most of you are not. And I really can't stress enough that there's not a lot of learning happening. There's not. And even in good schools, like efficient public schools, like the time that a child spends learning is less than 100 minutes out of the day. So it's less than 2 hours when they're actively learning. Most of the time is spent on transitions, going from class to class, going over, going over the rules of the classroom, people getting up, going to the bathroom, etc., going to lunch, going to gym. So the time that they actually spend instructing students at good schools is a very small amount of time. So if you can even work with your child or grandchild for an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon, you really should feel confident that they're getting a good education. You really should. Let's see. Taking a look. At your comments, you're saying a lot of stuff to kind of too fast. Um, I'm looking at, do I have a daily lesson online? No, not at the moment. When I was looking into the best way to teach them how to read their 4 and 5, what about a curriculum? Any curriculum, in my opinion, getting started, any curriculum is fine. Over time, you're going to research more. Maybe you want an Afrocentric curriculum. Maybe you want a love focused curriculum. I don't know. Maybe you want a Christian focused curriculum. It's really up to you. But to be honest, most any curriculum um, where you don't have to do that much work up front, I think is best, because homeschooling can be difficult mentally, really, like getting used to it. It's really not that hard, but just making that transition is difficult. So whatever homeschool, I did a video where I recommended some like easy curriculum and free curriculum. Whatever you can do there, I think it's fine. Let's see. Who was homeschooled? Dad took us out in 1999. I homeschool my boys and I do not have a teaching degree. My background is in biology. And the funny thing is that when you go to the elitist of the elite places and high schools, and you look at the schools like that the presidents send their kids to, those teachers don't have teaching degrees. They, like you, have degrees in their specific areas of expertise. So your science teacher may have, like you're saying, a background in biology. Your math teacher may be a mathematician. They're not a teacher by trade. They just know what they do really well. And so one thing that you can definitely do that I would recommend is reaching out to members of your community who have expertise in something. If there's someone who's really good at math, like you've got an accountant friend of a friend, take them up there, let them teach them math. You don't have to do it all. If you know that someone's really into science or into shop or something, let them teach that. You don't have to teach every single subject, and you certainly don't need to teach it every single day, because even here in our schools with science, and this started a while ago, like we teach science and social studies alternatively. So maybe June through or September through November, we'll teach science, and then November through January, we'll teach social studies, and then you'll have breaks off. That's why our kids don't know anything about science and social studies, because we're really focused on reading and math to boost up their test scores. So, if you teach your child science 2 days out of the week or 1 day out of the week, they're going to be learning more science than the average kid in public school. What standardized tests do you use for your children? What benchmarks do you use? Mine are 4 and 2, and I plan to homeschool them. Standardized test, I don't use any standardized test for them. But in order to benchmark in terms of like their reading ability, I do use reading A through Z, which is just like a leveled reading thing. For math, I don't use anything. That's not true. Sorry, that's not true. I do have a general, I don't use anything at the moment, but my standard are IQ tests, which are, a little bit iffy, and the ISCE private school entrance exams, and this other type of IQ test. I'll do another video where I talk about those. But basically what I do is I look and I see, what I have done, I looked at what the average 5 or 6-year-old going to like the top private school in our nation, what they would have to do in order to get into that private school, and like what math concepts, what reading concepts, what science concepts do they need to know. And I kind of just have that in the back of my mind, but I don't test them on that. But if you want to find a little bit more about it, you can go to testingmom.com, and there's just a whole bunch of information about gifted testing and really strenuous tests for your children. And that's really the only way you're going to know how, like, where the bar is. Because sometimes I think people get, not sometimes, I know people get complacent, and people will argue with me telling me that their child's school is good. And I'm like looking at the test scores telling them it's not, and they're like, but my child gets all A's, not knowing I as a teacher can put whatever grade I want to put down on the report card. Doesn't even matter to me. Your child can be getting good grades and still not know anything, and not know anything, but not have gained that knowledge that they were supposed to. But when you look at what other kids are doing in an environment that's extremely competitive, and like I've mentioned in other videos, I also look abroad in Finland and Korea and Japan, because I want my kids to be able to compete with those kids. I don't even want it to be any competition. I want them to blow them out of the water, right? So when you look at that and you say, okay, well, it's not necessarily about age, but you can say, okay, well, this third grader, has a vocabulary of, I don't know, 1,000 upper level words. Like, is my child reading enough so that they'll have that vocabulary too? Or taking a look, especially at the writing samples, and you'll see a huge world of difference between the writing of the average American kid and the writing of the average American kid whose parents make $1 million, right? So you'll just be able to see that there's a lot more that kids can know if we know what they're supposed to know. Let's see. Message taken away. Bob Books. I want to be objective when homeschooling. I'm not sure if you're talking about I'm not sure what you mean, but yeah, I think for me, I also like to be a certain type of objective when homeschooling as well. And schools don't necessarily do that. Sometimes some schools are very liberal, and you might not want your child in a liberal environment. Some schools are very conservative. You might not want your child in a conservative environment. So yeah, you should definitely, whatever you want to teach your child, you have the right to teach them. Let's see. We use the CAT test, I believe it's called. We test in May every year. Yeah, and so depending on what the laws and regulations are in your state, homeschooling may look different. Some states may require you to have your child tested and do the standardized tests as the other kids. Like here in Maryland, you have the option to do that. I opted out because one, my child's too young. Two, the test for me is too easy. I don't care if my child passes their easy test and all the other kids can't pass it. That doesn't tell me anything. So I personally don't care to have my child tested through the state. But you can also get them tested through their doctor. There are like intelligence test, and I don't use that as a measure of their intelligence, but I use that as like, okay, what else can they possibly learn? So I think that's it, guys. I'm going to get off of here. It's pretty late where we are here, but thank you guys for jumping on. I'm trying to go up to see if I can see the earlier comments. Teachers were off the chain. Yeah, there's actually a lot of racism. I mean, you can't go into any American school and not find racism. I can find it like this. It just doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not someone who even looks for racism, right? I'm not. When I'm teaching, I'm all about the kids. But for some reason, it's just rampant throughout our schools, especially when teachers who are not Black get frustrated because they can't deal with our kids. Then all of a sudden they start to say some racist type of stuff, and they don't try to hide it. So, all right, guys, good night. Bless you and bless your beautiful children and grandchildren. Bye-bye.